Let's see. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me? Feel free to write in the chat to make sure you can hear me loud and clear. Just making sure that YouTube is working. Great. Thank you. iPhone 3. Great. Good to see people joining in. Um, just give me, let's wait maybe one more minute just to get a few more people in. Great. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm currently here in um, uh, Santa Fe, New Mexico, doing a mini trip here in northern New Mexico. So I'm outside, um, enjoying the weather here. And so yeah, so we'll be doing sort of a nature version of this Q&A. We can get started. So just for context, this is a live Q&A, and we've done a few of something like this in the membership previously where we have group discussions, but this is also meant to be open to the public. So we're doing both members from the CIRS Lab membership, and we're doing people on YouTube. So this is currently being streamed live on the YouTube channel for CIRS Lab. So yeah, it's exciting. But yeah, so this is a time where, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat related to CIRS, related to your situation, your experience, your journey with CIRS. It could also be comments. It doesn't have to be just in the form of questions. If you have questions for me, or just a question for brainstorming in general, we can uh, we can start there. So let's see. And just so people on the YouTube channel, you can if you join in with your account, you should be able to join the chat on the right side of the live stream. And you're more than welcome to put in your questions there in the chat as well. So yeah, I hope everybody in the membership group is doing okay. Um, maybe while you guys think of some questions, I can start by uh, talking about my uh, little trip here in northern New Mexico. Um, and maybe you have questions about that, so I'll get started on that. I'm here in northern New Mexico and Santa Fe, like I said, and I'm going to be here for a few days, maybe a little bit more. Uh, just kind of doing apartment scouting. Um, as some of you know, I'm currently living in California, Southern California, in the LA area. I've been there for several months now, and that move to the LA area was meant to be temporary for me. And if I'm honest, for me as a patient who's very sensitive, the LA area is not very search friendly. It may not be the case for everybody, but for me, it's a little bit hard. It's not a place where I can just go out and easily walk around and hang out and do things sort of openly. So, when I moved to LA, it was meant to be sort of a transition to scout some other areas in the west side of the country. I was initially fixated on Colorado as one destination, but I was also considering other places like uh, Las Vegas and then northern New Mexico or New Mexico. I wasn't very sure about Arizona. I've had a lot of mixed stories from Arizona, from different people, and I'm not necessarily looking for desert-like environments, more like open spaces with dry weather, uh, but not necessarily totally desert. So, probably some vegetation. Um, uh, I think my body sort of seems to do well in that, and Southern California has that. It's this sort of dry forest. Uh, it's a little bit deserty, but it also has vegetation, and also, of course, it has the ocean. If you're living in the coast, but um, so I'm looking for something like that. Colorado has elements of that. It's very similar in that sense, um, but it's not as populated, dense in terms of population and buildings and things like that. So it's a little bit more nature friendly, or significantly more nature friendly. I'm being modest here. Uh, and so Santa Fe is a small town. Actually, Dr. Lauren Sparks was the one who had recommended checking it out because she is located. She's based in Santa Fe, and she is a CIRS patient herself. So I said, okay, let me go and check it out. And at the same time, I wanted to take a little bit of break from the LA area. It was getting a little bit too intense for me, especially as the temperatures went up. So I wanted to take a mini break from that and go to a place where it was more quiet, so I can focus on work and just relax a little bit. So yeah, that's the story, the background story of that, and I can see that um, there are a few questions here now. Um, let's start here. So one question is, what are oxalates and what are the symptoms associated with them? Um, so oxalates they're basically natural compounds, and these are compounds that are found in things like vegetables and fruits, different kinds of foods, grains, to a larger degree in certain vegetables, right? And they tend to be highly concentrated in some green leafy vegetables. But I think also foods like soy, almonds, potatoes, um, some grains. I think beets also have, right? They're high in oxalates. So they're naturally occurring compounds, and uh, it's a s- it essentially is a compound that's sort of a variety of salts. So there's this sort of variations of that are in the salt category, right? And um, this so the question is, what are the symptoms associated with them? Well, if you're healthy, if your body's healthy and functioning, you shouldn't necessarily have any symptoms associated with oxalates. Your body should be able to metabolize that in the same way that it processes or metabolizes salts when you consume salts and things like that. Um, the problem, or one of the problems, is when your body becomes very sluggish. It starts holding on to things, and that's something that happens very frequently in CIRS. And I'll jump in here to sort of make a clarification, right? That uh, the problem with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, the fundamental problem is an immune reactivity problem, and that immune reactivity triggers inflammation. That inflammation creates metabolic, hormonal, digestive, cardiovascular dysfunction, and at the end, ultimately, abnormalities in terms of brain functioning and brain structure. and gene expression. So that's the sequence of events driven by the immune response. And all of that over time can shift our bodies to a state of toxicity because the body shifts into a state of holding on to things, holding on to chemicals, holding on to uh, all kinds of toxins, heavy metals, and things like that that are not just necessarily like mold biotoxins or actinobacteria or endotoxins. So it's a compounded effect. And one of the things that can happen is your body becomes very uh, sensitive to oxalates, and maybe they can start building up, and that could be tied to um, dysfunction in the kidneys. So the livers and the kidneys are organs that they tend to become dysfunctional and CIRS in the case of the liver, right? And these are detoxifying organs. Um, and the liver is heavily burdened by the fact that it does so many things in CIRS. Number one, most of the biotoxins that recirculate in the body that we can't eliminate because of the inflammatory response, they're going to come back to the liver. So the liver is going to start harvesting a lot of biotoxins. That's going to congest bioflow. It's going to congest just the whole mobilization. The bile acids become stuck. You don't quite have the nice normal release of bile acids. So that's on one end, and then on the other hand, the kidneys also become a little bit overwhelmed. And part of it is, as I said, is just the body's just holding on to a lot of things. The other part is that there's going to be dysregulation of the ratios between water and minerals, and that includes salts, often because, or mainly driven because of dysregulation of the antidiuretic hormone and the ratios between that and osmolality, which is just uh, these are markers that tell us whether you have the right balance of water and minerals in your body. And so when that becomes dysregulated, one or two things can happen. On one end, you could just be uh, uh, releasing a lot of water, so not retaining enough water and retaining a lot of minerals and salts. Or the opposite could also be true, where you're not retaining minerals and salts, but you're retaining a lot of water. And it depends on the direction of whether, the ADH osmolality ratio is imbalanced in one direction or in another, whether ADH is high or whether ADH is low. And it varies by patient. But this imbalance in being able to preserve that regulation of minerals and water in the body is going to contribute for some people to accumulate oxalates as part of that sort of mineral complex. So that's at a very general, basic level, part of what's happening with oxalate dumping problems, which is how people refer to that. So as you get better with CIRS, you start calming down the inflammatory response. For some people, not everybody, getting out of exposure, starting the binders on Welco and cholestyramine, that starts to normalize some of these things, and they're better able to detox and do these things, and they can benefit from things like, if you're doing charcoal, if you're doing methylation protocols and things like that. For other people, they might need to go further into the Shoemaker protocol. They might need to, clear Marcons if Marcons is a problem. They might need to wait until they get on VIP, which is step 12 of the protocol, vasoactive intestinal peptide, the nasal spray, which helps restore immune function and sort of calms down everything and ultimately helps reset the inflammatory response and the immune dysregulation. And once those things start happening, sometimes people naturally get better at just eliminating these things. And sometimes they need a little bit of support. They might need to steer away from, high oxalate foods and things like that. But it is a sort of a, incremental process. It for some people it might take some time. For other people, it's a problem. For me personally, I I've been okay with most green vegetables, cruciferous vegetables. I did start getting sensitive at one point to spinach and kale. And there may have been something there about oxalates because I was having my inflammatory markers of kidney functioning were off and they're still kind of off. So there might be something to that. But I haven't had any, I did have kale recently, actually, last 2 months ago, and I had no issues. I had no issues eating it. I felt fine, but there was a point in the past, maybe like a year ago, where I kind of had to stay away from those things because I was feeling a little bit weird and getting dizzy, and maybe part of that was the oxalates. So yeah, long answer to a good question. So that's great. Moving on. Okay, so I'm going to read out loud. I've been reading that people with the HLA gene should not get the Gardasil vaccine. I, of course, did get it uh, years ago and have the HLA gene. What is the reason it was supposed to be avoided with that gene? Yes, and someone responded in the chat that it's been associated. There's only one haplotype of the HLA cluster of haplotypes that Dr. Shoemaker correlated with problems of exposure to the Gardasil vaccine. Um, and right, so that's the one. Yep. So it's 11352B. That's the haplotype that's been correlated to having potential problems there. And it comes down to the basic principle of what's happening with people who carry one of these haplotypes, which are in the HLA class 2 uh, uh, category. These are genes that are, um, they're sort of our instruction manual for telling the body, telling the immune system giving it the instruction manual. So like, when you encounter this is what you're going to be doing. This is the whole process. This is the step by step. But the people who are carrying some of these different haplotypes, right? The idea is there's going to be poor antigen presentation and poor antigen processing. What that means is your body encounters some kinds of or certain kinds of allergens or antigens or toxins, in this context, biological toxins, and the immune system does not have the instruction manuals to properly carry out the step-by-step process of when you encounter this. Yes, it's okay to have an initial inflammatory response. You can freak out a little bit, but eventually the immune system has to target it, create a memory trace, and then create an antibody so that it can be safely eliminated. That's kind of the gist of the process. So with all of these HLAs, there is different degrees of um, poor antigen presentation or poor antigen recognition. And so in the context of the haplotype 11352B, um, it just so happens that Dr. Shoemaker found a correlation with people who were exposed to this vaccine. That could be a potential trigger of CIRS, of this hyperinflammatory response. And it's really just a correlational aspect. There's not necessarily an answer in terms of why that particular haplotype. It just so happens that that haplotype has been strongly associated. And if you think about the concept behind vaccines, it's essentially a safe way, right, of inducing immune reactivity to then induce antibody production so that your body and your immune system can create an antibody to that specific foreign allergen. And in this context, it seems to be the case that these people will have an improper immune response to the exposure to the antigen within the vaccine, right? And vaccines, the basic principle of vaccines is you have a dead uh, 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 allergen or trace, a fragment of a living organism, whether it's a virus, whether it's a bacteria. Typically, it's a viral uh, issue, um, and right. So and so what should happen when you have a normal immune response is you expose the immune system to that particle that's dead, it's not living, your immune system creates a response. Maybe it could be temporarily inflammatory. And so that's why sometimes when people get a vaccine, they do feel a little bit weak. They feel sometimes achy, flu-like, and that's your innate immune system triggering that initial inflammatory response. So it's the same exact process as CIRS, but what should happen after that is over a series of days, the adaptive immune system starts going to work. It starts creating the memory trace and it starts creating the antibodies. And then you move away from that inflammatory response. But then these people potentially they're susceptible at not engaging that process. They stay stuck on the innate immune side, on the inflammatory response side, and they never produce an antibody properly. And so now you have an innate immune system that's just stuck and frozen and thinking that there is a major infection going in your body and it's freaking out and it's going right, sounding all the alarms. So it's the same principle as with any other toxin, whether it's mold, fungi, mold, actinobacteria, endotoxins, or some of the other categories like spider bites or algae blooms. But in that particular haplotype, there seems to be that can become a source of a trigger, or at least that's what the correlation suggests. And potentially, this could be also initiated by something like COVID, right? And so, at least in potentially in a subset of people in the population, perhaps people who have some of these haplotypes. We haven't, as far as I know, I don't think anybody in the CIRS community has identified specific haplotypes to COVID. But it is something that I think they're looking into to see if there's like a haplotype that's very strongly associated with improper immune response to COVID, the COVID spike protein. And so that may potentially explain why some people experience a priming event of CIRS through COVID. A lot of people talk about that. But yeah, that's sort of the characterization of that. It's a good question. And someone's asking any HLAs for tetanus. As far as in terms of, I'm assuming you're asking in terms of susceptibility, if there's any. As far as I know, no. I don't think I've seen anything like that, and there may be. As far as I know, if there is, it would be outside the CIRS literature, the Shoemaker, at least the published work. Um, so, but in principle, I'm highly speculating here. In principle, the same problem could arise with a number of different um, antigens or allergens, right? But uh, I would imagine that if that would have been problematic for the CIRS community, that would have been identified already. So it may not be across the board that all vaccines will serve in the same way for priming events to trigger CIRS. But that's a good question as well. Okay, so next question. Someone is asking, is that one of the reasons why when you start the carnivore all meat diet, uh, the carnivore all meat diet can cause Herx reactions because you begin to release more oxalates? It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. That could be one of the reasons. People, and also considering that when you go into a carnivore diet, and I'm not an expert in carnivore, in the carnivore diet, I've done like very short stretches of the carnivore diet by necessity at different points, but it's never been my staple diet. I've always been low carb. As I got sick or when I got sick with CIRS, I'm eating more carbs now. And so there might be other people who might better address that process. Uh, uh, off the top of my head, Judy from Nutrition with Judy would be. I know she's talked a lot about this, but one of the things that happens when you go into a carnivore diet is it is going to impact how your body retains minerals in general, right? The water mineral retention process is changed because of what you're consuming, and it may be the case that going carnivore sort of uh, pushes the body to start releasing oxalates, or just these things start moving around, and they might create a lot of discomfort if you've been harvesting a lot of those things. Okay, so next question. In regards to the Genie test, would you want to wait until you are in a safe place you want to remain in for a longer period of time, or is there a right time to get this test? Um, in general, the basic trends that I've seen for taking the Genie is either you're treatment naive with the Shoemaker protocol, so you're at baseline, you haven't started the treatment, you're very sick, and then you want to get like a baseline assessment of how sick are you from the perspective of gene expression. So that's one context where people often do uh, Genie. The other context that's where the Genie test is frequently used is when people are doing the treatment and they start stalling and they can't figure out why they're stalling. So in a situation like that, introducing the Genie could be a very useful tool to pinpoint things like what are the biotoxins that are you are reacting to currently. So it might be that you've been trying to do certain things, they're not working, and then you do the Genie, and lo and behold, you have massive reactivity to actinobacteria, and that's it, right? That's the only thing you're reacting to. So that gives you like a guiding path for uh, a guiding path for uh, catering your treatment towards that and doing things around actino, not only cleaning, but also the treatment can change a little bit. The kinds of uh, uh, safety practices that you do to try to keep actino at bay besides cleaning can change, or you might want to be more intense on that. So those are that's one example in which you could do the Genie to inform your decision making when you're stalled. Another context where Genie could be useful is going back to the topic of vaccines. uh, Genie can tell you if you're experiencing, or if your body has what we call T cell deficiency, which is just another way of saying whether your adaptive immune system is suppressed such that it's having a hard time producing antibodies. And that's something that happens with some CIRS patients where the adaptive immune system goes into hibernation, and it's not going to be producing antibodies. More generally, it's going to be more, let's say, lazy at doing that. And so let's say you want to get vaccinated, so that could be a really good way to determine, is your body ready to get a vaccine. So then if that marker, the the T cell marker, can't remember now the number of the biomarkers in the Genie. Um, there's forgetting now the number, which one it is, but if that marker shows uh, deficiencies in antibody production, that may suggest that you may want to hold on getting a vaccine until you can correct that, and that can get corrected with treatment. It's been shown to uh, get corrected with VIP with step 12, as I said. Um, so yeah, that's another example in which using Genie could be useful. I'm trying to think of another example where the Genie could be. Oh, so here's another example. If you're having molecular hypometabolism, which is just a way of saying your cells are having a really hard time converting glucose and oxygen into a significant or sufficient number of ATP, which is just energy. So cells are just generating a very low amount of ATP or energy. And instead, what happens is a lot of the glucose that is entering the cell, it gets converted into lactic acid. So you may enter into what we call metabolic acidosis. So your body becomes very acidic. and that's not a good state to be in prolonged periods. We do get acidic or lactic acid, I should say, when we work out, when we do strength training. That's what gives you the sense of being sore. Your muscles get sore. It's lactic acid buildup, or at least that's part of what's happening. But that happens in short bursts, and then you kind of reset. But in CIRS, some people or a lot of patients develop this hypometabolism and lactic acid buildup in a chronic way, like all the time, and so that starts building up, and so that can inform your decision of what kind of dietary choices do you want to have while you have hypometabolism. Is your body ready to metabolize glucose properly, or do you need to eat glucose? Do you not need to eat glucose? So these are the questions you could ask by doing that. So if these are areas where you're having trouble, the Genie can be useful, and there are many other examples of this. If you want to know whether you're at risk of a stroke or a cardiovascular event, you can look at markers that are specific to coagulation abnormalities in Genie. So if your genes are expressing micro clotting behavior, that can put you at greater risk of having different cardiovascular events, including stroke or a heart event, or eventually long-term vascular dementia. It's a type of dementia. So yeah, so these are contexts again where you can use the Genie. But to summarize it, the two main places where a lot of people use it is at the very beginning, or when they hit a wall with treatment and they don't know how to move forward, and you get this higher resolution information. Yeah, okay. So the next question is, besides VIP, what else would you do to repair brain atrophies identified by NeuroQuant? There's different things that you could do. And I would say a big category for people with brain abnormalities, if you've done a NeuroQuant, if you have a radiology report from a radiologist confirming that you have some issues in the brain that are that have been identified, I would say phospholipids in general are going to be probably really important, a really important add-on in the treatment. And often what happens with people who have a lot of atrophy, one of the things that can happen is they're going to become deficient in certain kinds of phospholipids. And phospholipids are integral to the membrane of cells. And one of the things that happens when you're undergoing atrophy is that cell membrane, the structure, not only the function, but the structure is compromised, and that structure is primarily composed of fat, lipids, and phospholipids. There's different kinds of phospholipids, right? And you can think of them as little small bricks that help create the wall of your cell membrane. And different phospholipids are like different bricks with slightly different characteristics, and they all come together to kind of form that wall. And that also will give the cell fluidity, and so that it can sort of be very fluid in its in the way that it expands and contracts. And so restoring phospholipids is going to, I'm not going to say for everybody, but very often is going to be an important piece of that. And many of you have heard me talk about plasmalogens as a category that seems to be very big. I'm a big fan. I've benefited personally a lot from plasmalogens. It is a category of phospholipids that seem to consistently be deficient in a lot of different neurodegenerative diseases and a lot of chronic diseases like cancer, Like I said, neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and then neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD. They all have a commonality, at least based on published literature, suggesting that there's a deficiency with plasmalogens. In addition to plasmalogens, there's going to be, the sort of the more classic, the more well-known things like fish oil, omega-3s. There's going to be omega-6s in the picture as well. You do need, for cells to be healthy, they do need certain ratios or certain amounts of these different fatty acids. And then there's going to be pro-resolvent mediators or SPMs that are also integral to that. There are other lipid supplements like wheat germ oil. Yeah, that's one example. There's a few others that are just can't recall, but those are sort of the main categories of lipids, and you want to think about that. If you want to get a really good sense of deficiencies in terms of phospholipids, the company Prodrome, which is the company that makes the plasmalogen products, Prodrome Glia and Prodrome Neuro, they offer a test. It's called the Prodrome Test Kit, and you can order it. They'll send you a kit to do the test, and then you can send it back to them, and they'll give you a report, sort of breaking down the phospholipid compositions in your blood, and that can inform where is it that you're deficient in these categories and what would be the best thing to target. But very generally, a lot of people by default are going to benefit a lot. If you have brain abnormalities, the product from plasmalogens called Glia, a lot of people are going to probably need that, or it's going to be a very important piece of that. So I think all of that is going to be very helpful, or can be very helpful. It's certainly been very helpful for me, especially once I integrated VIP and I was doing plasmalogens. I'm also doing omega-3, omega-6 balance oil. I haven't been doing omega-3 fish oil because I have a lot of allergies to omega-3s, and I still have allergic reactions to seafood. I haven't had success yet, and I would want to introduce omega-3s or fish oil at some point. But yeah, that's just my case. Other people do more than fine. They're going to need omega-3s. A lot of CIRS patients benefit greatly from fish oil. It's part of the Shoemaker protocol. So yeah, so that's a big category, phospholipids. There are other things out there in terms of brain atrophy. There's other peptides out there. I would think of them as complementary, not as replacements for VIP, until we can show that there's some other peptide out there that can do the same things that VIP does, and we haven't found that to date. So anything that you do on the peptide side for your brain, just think of it as a complementary piece to your treatment, and it's always good to do it with the supervision of a doctor, a practitioner. Trying to think what else would be helpful for brain atrophy. Well, I mean, if you're in the category of tick-borne infections, which is another big category in this illness, certainly addressing the infection is going to be very important, because that is the direct source of injury or inflammation to your central nervous system. Very often when you have chronic Lyme or chronic tick-borne infection, you know, chances are that you have this bug or these bugs roaming around tissues that include your central nervous system and maybe even your brain. So making sure you address that is going to be really important. If you're in the category of people who have dental cavities, you have a tooth infection, really important to also go after that in order to start correcting brain abnormalities, because that may be your your primary source of brain abnormalities. And yes, so neurofeedback, absolutely, absolutely, the neurofeedback, um, and yes, and some, people are commenting here. Hyperbaric oxygen treatment. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. It's crazy because some people, when they get hyperbaric oxygen treatment for the first time, it's like for the first time they're getting actual oxygen running through their blood, and they feel like amazing. Other people actually feel sicker, and that could be due to different reasons. Maybe they're not ready for it, and maybe they have a tick-borne infection and they're just flushing the whole thing in their system, and now they're feeling really sick. But for a lot of people, especially once they're past like the early steps of the Shoemaker protocol and they're trying to normalize their, you know, uh, later markers, especially VEGF, which is one of the blood markers that is correlated with blood oxygenation and promotion of vascular creation, or blood vessel formation, I should say. Um, and so if you're very deficient in VEGF, you're gonna be very skewed towards having poor uh, blood flow and poor blood oxygenation. But even when you don't have low VEGF, most CIRS patients are going to have poor blood flow. And even just because there's blood abnormalities in terms of platelet formation, in terms of coagulation, all of that, and then the inflammation on top of that. So the hyperbaric oxygen can help start calming them down. And if you're in the later stages, it may actually help you cross to the next step in your treatment, and you may start feeling like you can do physical activities better and things like that. And certainly for the brain, this is like huge, because one of the problems we have is we don't get enough blood delivery into the brain. We don't get enough oxygen. That may contribute to some of the atrophy, right? If you're not getting enough oxygen, it certainly will impact your brain functioning, and neuronal activity. Um, Photobiomodulation therapy. I'm actually not very familiar with that therapy. Uh, that would be an interesting add-on tool. If anybody wants to comment, if anybody knows about that, feel free to comment in the chats, and I'll pick up on it. So next question, would you wait until VEGF and other blood markers have normalized before spending the money time on hyperbaric oxygen or feedback plus melanogens? I think this probably depends a lot on the patient. There are patients who are very resilient physically, even when they're very sick. There are people who are physically doing really well, but internally they're doing really poorly, and like cognitively they're doing really bad. Their brain is not doing well. And the inverse is also true. There's people who, well, they're probably not doing well cognitively, but they're also not doing well physically. And it's like often these are people who have a hard time tolerating foods, they're extra sensitive, they have a lot of histamine issues, they have thyroid issues, and things like that. So I think it to some degree depends on the patient. But that said, when it comes to um, things like hyperbaric oxygen treatment, if you follow the Shoemaker protocol, you do want to wait until the step, or you would want to wait until the step where you're correcting VEGF or something along those lines, which is a step where you're trying to build exercise tolerance. So if you're one of those patients who just gets very fatigued from doing very minimal activity or exercise, right? You might want to wait until you've um, cleared some of the inflammation and clear some of the burden in the body before you can start pushing your body. And certainly the hyperbaric oxygen, for some people, that it can push the body, and if it's not ready, again, it may make them feel worse. So the safe step or the safe version of this would be to wait until that step with correcting VEGF. Um, to do that, and then there's things like fish oil that can also be used, and then light exercise that's incremental and things like that. For neurofeedback, I think it's more of a question of how impactful is it going to be. Um, you could try it, and if you feel benefit from neurofeedback when you're, even at the early stages, I mean, I don't necessarily see why that would be a bad idea. I'm a big fan of, if someone's taking a supplement that's uh, low risk or no harm, and they feel benefits from it, even if it's not fixing them, if it gives you some functionality while you move on, as you move along the steps, uh, I'm a big fan of that. Plasmalogens, that's a really good one. I don't have a good answer to it. It's not clear to me if plasmalogens would work as well from the very beginning of the shoemaker steps, or if it's something that it would be best to wait until you're later on in treatment, maybe once you're closer to VIP. I think the jury is still out for that. It could be that you could start doing this from the very beginning. It may not be the case. I don't I don't think we have a good answer for that. With that said, there are people like Dr. Andrew Heyman, who he has a version of the Shoemaker protocol where he likes to start patients with foundational steps where he does introduce some phospholipid supplementation from the very beginning, including phosphatidylcholine, which I forgot to mention earlier. That's another phospholipid that's really important. Phosphatidylcholine, balance oil, and butyrate, and things like that. Although butyrate, I think he likes to wait until later in treatment because that can make people feel sicker because the butyrate will start burning off some of the uh, pro-inflammatory abnormal fatty acids that we start building or creating in the body, and that can make you sicker. So if you're not ready for that, maybe you don't want to go that route until you feel like you can handle things a little bit better. One thing I will say about uh uh cognitive things to add on for cognitive improvement and for brain functioning or restoring brain abnormalities. Again, this is very experimental from the perspective of CIRS, but I've been doing this and it's been very successful. There's this app called Evolutioner. It's essentially I think you pay like $15 a month, and then the way it works is you have access to all these songs that embedded in them have very specific frequencies that have been shown by many studies to induce all kinds of amazing things at the cellular level, including neurogenesis and including stem cell production, um, and just neurogenesis, the formation of new cells, new neurons. It's been shown. There was a NASA study back in the 80s that showed this in an in vitro study. So, not, you know, in a live person. I don't think we're ethically allowed to open someone's brain and look at what happens if you directly stimulate, but that has been shown in those studies, and there's been since then clinical studies showing all kinds of benefits of an intervention using this evolutioner technology. So the app is called Evolutioner. Again, you have these 12-minute songs. You listen to these songs that have these very specific frequencies that stimulate these things. I've been doing it since I started VIP. I've had a lot of success. I feel like it's been very, very useful, very calming. There's just something really powerful about it. It isn't binaural beats, it's a different thing. The binaural beats principle is a different, it's not quite the same thing. And I would say that the evolutioner uh, um, um, concept to me has more it's more promising in terms of what it can do long term. I feel like the binaural beats to me is a little bit more on the, if you want to feel a little bit better temporarily just to kind of calibrate like your brain, but it doesn't necessarily translate to what I'm saying, which is inducing neurogenesis, inducing stem cell formation in the body. So check that out. Again, Evolutioner. give it a try and see how you feel. You can do it every day, once a day. I do it during the day, somewhere early during the day to sort of get that information. So yeah, okay. So let's move on. Um, so we're getting some questions through YouTube. I'll try to. So there's a question on the membership group. Can CIRS cause lactic acidosis along with neuropathy? When you see CIRS patients stuck in a chronic pain storm like this, what testing would you recommend? And someone already answered. I'm going to read this answer because it's a good answer. Somebody answered to that question. Lactate acidosis is a high anion gap metabolic acidosis due to elevated blood lactate. Yep. Lactic acidosis results from overproduction of lactate, decreased metabolism of lactate, or both. So yeah, right. It's right. You don't want your body to be in this highly acidic state. Essentially, it's going to again, it's going to be a sign that number one, you're not producing enough or sufficient energy output from your cells. And when in fact it should be. So a lot of this glucose turns into metabolic acidosis, or just lactic acid, I should say. And so number two, that's going to cause all kinds of issues. The most commonly associated issues with metabolic acidosis and CIRS is pulmonary hypertension. So that sense of shortness of breath that a lot of us get, where we feel like we can't quite breathe all the way in. That's a response that's strongly tied to lactic acid buildup. Number two, certainly brain fog. A lot of the sort of low-grade chronic sustained brain fog in the illness can come from lactic acid buildup. Number three, feeling very tired all the time could be also due to lactic acid buildup. I feel like I'm missing another symptom here, but those are sort of some of the canonical symptoms. If you ever experience something like I feel very sore, even though I haven't done any exercise, that's a sign that you may be having excessive lactic acid buildup and driven by the hypometabolism. I don't know if we can directly correlate that with neuropathy. I think that could be driven by other things. So the lactic acid is going to contribute to brain atrophy. It's perhaps the main mechanism in CIRS that drives brain atrophy. So shrinkage of especially the cortical parts, the outer parts of your brain, when they start shrinking, and we see it in the neuroquant, there's a good chance that you have hypometabolism, that you have metabolic acidosis, and that's going to push the brain to sort of engage in this uh, pruning effect. There's this pruning effect of the neurons and cells. It's like they're becoming dehydrated because they're not getting the energy that they need in order to flourish and function, essentially. So, yes, great question. So I'm going to jump into the YouTube. There's a few questions in there. So, one question is, which brand and how much phospholipids do you take? So I'm taking, like I said, Prodrome Glia. Right now, I'm taking a low dose. I'm taking about 20 drops of the oil per day. I'm not doing like a high dose as I used to at one point. I'm doing balanced oil from Body Bio. I'm doing phosphatidylcholine from Body Bio. And for those, I do somewhere around 2 to 3 grams a day. I am wanting to try this phosphatidylcholine from Prodrome. I've seen very good results with people who've tried it. It's different from the Body Bio one because the Body Bio one is plant-based. The phosphatidylcholine from Prodrome is animal-based. It's based from eggs, egg yolk. And the argument that has been laid out by Dr. Dan Goodenow, who's the creator of the Prodrome supplements, is that animal-based phosphatidylcholine is bioavailable to the brain, whereas the plant-based version of phosphatidylcholine is not. And part of it is for uh, biological uh, evolutionary reasons. So the plants inherently don't have a brain. So the phosphatidylcholine that's produced by the plants is not suited to be consumed by the brain. So the animal base, the egg yolk base, is according to Dr. Goodenow. And I've had people who've tried both, and when they do the animal based version of phosphatidylcholine, they notice a big difference between the two. So I've been wanting to try it. Unfortunately, it is a bit expensive of a supplement. So that's one reason I personally have not tried it. But once I have a chance, I am hoping to go that route. So those are the lipid supplements that I'm currently taking. I would be taking Omapram if I were to do like a fish-based supplement, and that has like omega-3s and it has SPMs. So that's the other supplement that I would personally do, and I've done it in the past if I were to add something else on that front. Um, and then from there, it's for me, it's like um, eating a lot of healthy fats. I consume a lot of olive oil. Um, it has omega-9s, which are they are part of the plasmalogens that are part of glia. And it's very, very rich in polyphenols. I consume it. I don't cook with it. I just consume it in its normal temperature. Okay, so next question. Um, is the other lipid replacement you are trying to think of Omaprim or Omega XO? Yeah, I mentioned Omaprim. Yeah. So that's a lipid supplement that I think it's really good. It's very high quality. Um, the next question, I'm feeling well, but my heart rate soars when I exert myself with any physical activity. It goes way past zone 5, where I understand can cause cellular and muscle tissue damage. Hyperbaric oxygen. Um, well, that would be a good question to ask your practitioner. But I think, uh, yeah, I mean, hyperbaric oxygen could be a way to help jumpstart your body for sure. Uh, and so this is any kind of physical activity. It may be that you might still need to allow yourself to kind of move further along treatment with yeah, you might need to be, maybe there's an environmental piece if you're still in ongoing exposure. I've certainly experienced this. There's been times where I've been living in places where I just didn't feel quite right even outside, and trying to do exercise or physical activities in those environments would trigger either heart rate issues or just I would feel very weak very quickly. So there could be a number of things. You could try the hyperbaric oxygen, maybe in a very gentle way, but I would certainly make sure you're not in exposure. Especially like this can happen in gyms for some people who go to gyms, and if the gym is not, it's kind of like a sick area. They'll start doing exercise, and start getting heart palpitations, and then they'll start feeling weak and a little bit weird, and they don't get the energy that they should be getting. And sometimes I've seen this pop up because they're still dealing with exposure, and their bodies are still too susceptible to the exposures. So something to keep in mind there. So we're basically done with the hour of the Q&A. Um, so I think we're gonna wrap up here. These were all great questions. I'm hoping this was useful to everybody. We will be doing more of these moving forward, and share them on our YouTube live. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. And just a really quick announcement for the membership. On Saturday, we're going to be hosting Dr. Peg DiTullio and the CIRS Lab membership. She was kind enough to lend or share her time to come into the group. I'm getting thunderstorm or some thunder here now. But Dr. Peggy Tulio is going to come in and we're going to be doing a semi-informal interview. We're going to be asking her questions tied to her experience as a practitioner with CIRS patients. And she's someone who's incredibly well versed in the tick-borne illness space, which is a big, big topic these days. And she's been very successful at navigating that space. And I'll be asking her questions about that and also a few other things. And I think I'm really excited for that. So, I hope to see you there. And if you're not part of the membership, make sure to um, check it out and see if you would like to join. It's going to be a very exciting uh, 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 video interview, and it's going to be recorded, available to members afterwards. So yeah, I hope everybody has a good rest of the day, evening if you're in the East Coast, afternoon if you're in the West Coast, and if you're somewhere else, midnight or morning. So we'll be talking soon. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the day.